Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Skinwalker horror stories. First story. I think my wife is a skinwalker. My wife and I just recently welcomed my sweet daughter into this world. But I got a bad feeling she may not be as sweet as she seems to be to me. But to understand why I'd say that about my own daughter, I need to give a little backstory to the situation. We haven't been married very long, as it's not really frowned upon to marry soon in my family. But when we were first dating and staying with my parents, we slept in their living room, and when we woke up one morning I noticed the door was still unlocked, but I was always sure to keep it locked. I never really noticed anything else though. I never saw any handprints on the door or windows. I never saw anything out of the ordinary at all that would be a telltale sign of an intruder. I brought it up to my dad, so he took me to his office to check the CCTV monitor. No one had approached the house all night. In fact, everything was eerily still except for a very large cat that would always hang out in their yard. That cat had been around for a long time, though. We always thought maybe it was a neighbor's cat because we lived out in the backcountry of Texas and there were other people out in the woods. But growing up there, I did actually notice a lot of things that scared the shit out of me. I once saw my cat, Salem, shape-shifting right in front of my eyes when my little cousin and I were playing soldiers near the woods. One of the old men down the road would tell us stories of a panther that would kill people's horses, but I wondered if it was really my shape-shifting cat or something. My dad also told me a story of a man that lived on our land before we did that killed his daughter's bus driver for what she said he did to her one day when she came home crying. And he would see the ghost of that dad standing over him when he slept with a blood-stained shirt and evil radiating from his eyes. And of course, countless other stories of all sorts of things that go bump in the night. None of that really seemed related to that night. I noticed the door was unlocked. However, since then, I've noticed a lot of things are different about her than she used to be. But nothing too extreme, just minor things that only people really close to her would know. Like she started wearing makeup when she never really liked it before, and what she liked to eat changed. But I didn't really know how to explain it. I had only known her a few months, and only had to ask what she liked to eat so few times for dates and family gatherings. Every time I tried to talk to her about it, or ask her if something was wrong, she shot it down. So I just had to deal with the fact that maybe I was just discovering her for who she really is. I got used it. It wasn't a big deal after all. Like I said, it wasn't anything major, and she still seemed like the girl I loved. And like I said, we had only been dating for a few months at the time. She Aslo started calling me Delicious, which wasn't really a pet name we had used before. I tried to ignore how uncomfortable her tone was when she used it. It was probably just sexual anyway. More recently, I've noticed odd smells originating from under our house when I'm out working around the yard. I've also noticed a greater number of flies and carrion birds. I was hoping a lost dog or some large rodent had just crawled under there and died. But one day, I found the promise ring I had given her that she said she lost before we even moved to this house. It looked extremely old now and caked with mud. I started nosing under the house near where the ring was laying, and I found a large indentation on the earth, as if something was laying there but had been moved. Soon after that day, she surprised me with the news that we were going to be parents, and I've been so excited at first until I realized something. I just knew my initial suspicions were proven true when she got pregnant. You see, my wife warned me right away not to expect children because of an accident she had when she was small. She was infertile. Second story. You all need to chill about skinwalkers. I've been lurking around this subreddit for a while now, reading some of the biggest hits and the like. This is the first time I've actually made an account. First of all, let me thank each and every one of you for making me feel less alone. I've seen and done some crazy things in my life, and I'm not proud of some of them. Reading all of your stories makes me feel more normal. Now that's over. You all need to chill about the skinwalkers. I mean, the second you see someone talk about their experiences in a forest, you all run around screaming skinwalk like it's the end of the whole world and they're definitely going to die. And you do that regardless of where they're geographically, what time of year it is, or even the types of events they're experiencing. Honestly, it's enough to make me want to bang my head against the wall sometimes. First of all, they aren't even skinwalkers. Skinwalkers probably don't even exist anymore, since the Navajo culture has dwindled significantly, and, to my knowledge, there have been no Navajo shamans who have rejected their faith in recent years. It's possible there's one or two still around, but they're going to be low in number and in northeast Arizona and parts of New Mexico. They're desert dwellers and aren't even found in forests. The creatures that you're calling skinwalkers have never been given a proper name, but I've called them voice takers since I first encountered one when I was 12 or so. Back then, I lived with my parents in the forests of Northern California way off the beaten track. I mean, it was like an hour drive to the nearest town. It was that isolated. Our family had lived there for almost 40 years, so the creatures in the forest more or less left us alone until I got old enough to wander into the woods by myself. They were always curious about me, and more than once I had one knocking on my window in the early hours of the morning, but I don't count those as encounters because I was never in any real danger. The first time one properly got to me, I was 12 years old and out in the forest alone for the first time. It was my first year going to school instead of being homeschooled by my mother, and I, like most 12-year-olds, hated school. So I went into the forest to blow off some steam. It was getting dark already and was approaching sunset, which is important because voice takers, like most of the creatures in the forest, are nocturnal. I was walking along one of the trails, not paying attention to where I was going, when I heard someone call my name. They sounded just like my mother. So I called back, Mom. And of course it called to me again. Let me just say that this voice taker was smart. In fact, it was the smartest voice taker that I've ever come across. Most of the time, they aren't much more intelligent than your average dog, which is why they usually imitate animals. That's just as effective as using a human voice. You would not believe the number of campers who will follow the sound of dog barking in the forest for miles. Anyway, it was calling me from the direction of my house. So, of course, I turn around and start heading back towards the house and towards the voice taker. It's still calling me, and I'm yelling back every couple minutes. And then it says, "Alicia, I can hear you. Come over here." It sounded like my mother was terrified. I never saw my mother afraid before or after this incident, but I knew that she was then. This voice taker does fear and anxiety really well, by the way. Before I moved away from that house, I could pick it out of a crowd because it always sounds hurt. So I start panicking a little, not knowing why she was upset. I could tell that my mom was off the path, so I stepped off of it and kept following the sound of her voice, all the while telling her I was coming and to just wait for me. I get to where her voice is coming from, and it's coming from right behind this big tree. I walked around it, and the voice taker was there. One of the things you guys always get right is that voice takers don't want to be seen. They prefer to stay hidden until the very last second, and there's a damn good reason for that. They are ugly and awkward and won't pass for anything besides a voice taker when you lay eyes on them. This one was standing upright with its back against the tree, with its huge circular mouth hanging open, humpbacked with its shoulders at an awkward angle. One of its legs had been broken at some point, and it was standing awkwardly. It was scary as hell to hear my mother's voice echoing out of that gaping, circular hole they called a mouth. "There you are, Alicia," it said. I tried to run away, obviously, but it grabbed me. It wasn't much larger than I was, and it was skeletal and weak-looking, but being grabbed by it felt like I was being held by an adult 3 times my size. It threw me to the ground and climbed on top of me. That mouth expanded vertically, and then the rest of its body did too, like it had a zipper from the top of its head all the way down to its belly button. Flesh peeled backwards and opened up, exposing the inside of its body. The bones went too, the ribs and skull flexing like they were made of rubber. It was hollow inside, except for these pale sacks of flesh that hung pulsating from the inside of its rib cage and what looked like tonsils in its throat. I was trying to scream, but by then the weight of its body had pressed all the air out of my lungs. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest, and I couldn't move my arms or legs. Those pale organs inside of its rib cage started to grow and reach toward my face, and my adrenaline spiked so hard I felt my consciousness try to leave my body. It gave me a needed boost of clarity and awareness of my body. I managed to get my legs up against the voice taker and started kicking the inside of its torso, contorting my body to keep my face as far away from its organs as possible. After a couple seconds of that, it shifted to hold down my legs and I got my arm loose. To this day, I don't know why I thought it was a good idea, but I reached out and punched it in the tonsil. It screamed so loud and in so many different voices all at once that my senses almost couldn't handle it. It was like being blasted full volume with every action movie fight scene all at once. My ears started ringing, and I actually thought I had died for a moment. Then I realized I was still alive, and I punched again, hitting the other voice sac this time. The same thing happened again, and the voice taker was finally stunned enough to loosen its hold on me a little bit. I kicked it off of me and got to my feet. I seized the nearest large stick and hit the thing in the head twice. Then its zipper started to close up again. Instead of leaving well enough alone, I grabbed whatever I could from the ground and stuffed it inside. Rocks, leaves, beetles, flowers, pine needles. It all went into that voice taker. I wasn't able to get much in there, but what I did manage was enough to make it retch and spill open again, its body literally turning inside out. While it was lying there writhing and flapping like a demonic manta ray, I stood up, still holding the stick I had used to beat it, which is when I noticed there were 3 more watching me from the tree line. At this point, it was almost fully dark, but I could make them out because my entire body was aware of their shape now, like how you instantly recognize a snake when you see one. I was dead terrified, but I was angry too at that point, and I knew they wouldn't just let me leave. So I screamed as loudly as I could. "What do you want? I'll beat you all too." But none of them approached me, and after a few seconds, I backed away from all 4 of them. When none followed, I took my new stick and ran all the way back to the house. I was bleeding from the ears and temporarily deaf for about 10 minutes afterward, and sometimes I still hear ringing in my ears because of it. The voice takers never tried to lure me away ever again. I would tell you that I don't know why they all didn't pile onto me that night and kill me, but that would be a lie. I won't tell you why right now, though. If people ask, I might explain later, but for now, let's just say that there's a whole lot more than voice takers in most forests, and they're like coyotes or foxes in terms of the food chain, mostly feeding off scraps and remains other creatures leave behind. I learned later that their diet mostly consists of leaves and grass, that they only go after humans and other large animals during their breeding season, which begins in late summer and extends to mid-fall. The other thing that I learned later is why punching that voice taker in the tonsil. They collect sounds in the sacs in their throat. I don't know how, but they literally capture voices and release them back out. The voice taker that attacked me must have been hanging around the house for months or years catching fragments of my mother's voice in order to catch me off guard. When I punched those sacs, I released all of the sounds that the voice taker had stored up. It was the equivalent of punching someone's breath out of them, but like I had actually managed to collapse its lungs. Now, obviously, I don't recommend dealing with voice takers this way, since you'll probably just be eaten by others even if you incapacitate one in this way. Instead, if you think you're being attacked by voice takers, set up speakers facing outward from your house or campsite and play something with a whole bunch of voices in it. Sitcoms and comedy shows with ensemble casts are best, especially if they have a laugh track. The voice taker will be so preoccupied with collecting new voices and sounds that it will probably stop trying to attack you for that night. And then instead of hearing the voices of your friends or animals calling you from the woods, you get to hear snippets of dialogue from the office for a week or so. It's good fun and a lot less difficult to explain away. Plus, you'll give the other creatures in the woods a laugh with it, which is always a good first impression. If voice takers are your biggest problem, you've gotten off easy. I should mention that some of the other creatures that stories here have lumped in under the title SKINWALKER are different from the voice takers and are a whole lot more difficult to deal with. But I don't want to make this any longer than it already is, and I'm not convinced you'll take my advice even if I gave it. Thank you all for reading, and I hope you appreciate my advice and story. It's really helped me to type this out and get it off my chest. I never told anyone about what happened with the voice takers, not even my parents. Neither of them believed in their existence, and I never got the chance to prove it to them. Third story. I encountered an ancient creature at my new home. My dream was to move to a small, snowy town. I wanted a house in the woods on the outskirts of town, but not too far away. When I was 8, my family moved to Winnipeg. We lived in a small community with about 300 people. We moved to Winnipeg because my mother got a nice job opportunity there. I'm now 25, and I have lived here since. I don't like living in the city. I would much rather go back to our old community. I loved it there. 8 months ago, I won $2 million on a lotto ticket. I was ecstatic. I could finally move out and live my dream. I gave my parents $200,000 each and kept the rest for myself. I started to browse the internet for houses that matched my liking. After about 2 hours, I found one. It was perfect. It was located in Kenora, Ontario. It was on a secluded dirt road that led into the forest. Plus, it was only around 2.5 hours away. I was pumped. I went through the process and bought it. It was now mine. I packed my things and headed out around 11 a.m. to my new home. I arrived in around 3 hours. I unpacked my things and settled in. Around 2 months went by, and everything was going perfectly. I got a job there, and my parents came to visit every few weeks. I also started to make new friends there. Life could not be better. Some time passed again. My parents just left after visiting once again. It was about 6 p.m. I decided to head out for some dinner. I came home around 8 o'clock and started to get ready for bed. My shift started at 5 a.m. I got a quick shower and put some shorts on. I laid in bed and fell asleep. I was awoken by what sounded like a scream outside my window. My eyes shot open. I watched the curtains move in the breeze as I listened to it echo in the night silence. It scared the shit out of me. My heart was in my throat. I started to calm down when I remembered that foxes made similar noises. Fox, I murmured to myself. I started to drift off when it happened again. This time it sounded closer than the other. I sighed and got up out of bed. I was still a little on edge, but I pushed through the fear. I peered out the window towards the tall trees. I peered around, but to no avail. I looked at the hardwood floor for a second, then looked back up. Behind a tree around 100 feet away, I saw something move. I gasped and then closed the window. I ran back to bed and hid under the covers. The reason for my panic was a story my grandpa told me when I was 14. He told me about a creature called a skinwalker. He described it as a large humanoid creature with dark skin and no hair. It can disguise itself as an animal or a human and make sounds like a scream or mimic the voice of a loved one or friend to drag you in. The only way it could be killed was to shoot it with a silver bullet. This idea was running through my mind. I stayed under the covers for about 10 minutes. There have been no screams since then. Over time, I started to calm down. I had to use the bathroom, so I got up and walked towards the door. I stopped moving for a second to itch my ankle when I heard a whimper outside. I froze. It sounded like a dog or some other small animal. In my mind, I thought, stop being a pussy, it's probably just a dog or something. Skinwalkers aren't even real, you idiot. I snapped out of my haze and continued to the bathroom. I finished in there and walked out. Before returning to bed, I peered toward my front door. Something was blocking the window. There's a porch light, so I could tell something was there. I thought that maybe it was a desk I ordered that might have shown up sometime after I went to sleep. I watched the mass for about 5 seconds when my heart dropped. I watched as the mass slowly shrank below the window of the door. I started to hear the whimper again, this time muffled by the front door. I laid my back behind the wall by the stairs and pulled out my phone. I started to dial the number of one of my neighbors, Paul. I called Paul because he is a professional hunter. He has a lot of weapons, so he was the best choice. He didn't pick up the first 2 calls, but picked up the third. In a groggy, annoyed voice, he said, "What? I need help. There's something in my door whimpering," I said, my voice trembling. "Like what?" This time he sounded more interested. I'm not sure. I think of some sort of animal," I said. "Hold on." I heard the phone scuffle around a bit. Then he spoke again. "Looks like a small dog," he said. His bedroom window had a perfect view of my front door. "Please don't think I'm crazy, but I swear I saw it shrink." I said, feeling like an idiot. Dead silence. Hello. I asked. Did you say shrink? Yeah, WHY. He paused for a moment and started up again. Here's what I want you to do. Stay where you are. Try not to make any noise. If anything changes, you need to tell me, okay? I'm going to grab my rifle, he said confidently. Okay, I whispered. About 2 minutes passed. I could hear Paul moving and doing stuff in his house. Finally, he came back on. All right, I'm going to open the window, he said. I peered around the corner and looked out the transom window. I could see his window slide open. I heard him rack his rifle. All right, he said. I waited about 3 seconds until Paul spoke up again. I don't see anything there. As he said this, I realized that the whimpering had ceased. I can't hear the whimper anymore, I said. That's not good. Listen, I need you to make a decision. Either make a run for my house or I make a run to you, he exclaimed. Well, you have the gun, so could you come here? I said. He sighed. All right, I'm coming. He hung up the phone. About 8 seconds later, I heard his front door opening from my bedroom window. It took around a minute, but finally, I heard a knock on the door. Relief washed over me. I started to walk down the stairs. About halfway down, Paul shouted out to me, "It's safe to come to the door. Hurry." I sped up and started to unlock the door when I remembered what my grandpa said. It can make sounds like a scream or mimic the voice of a loved one or friend to drag you in. I stopped in my tracks and started to back up from the door. I headed back up the stairs and decided to peer out my bedroom window. There in the street was Paul, not moving. I turned white as a ghost. The person at the door wasn't Paul. It was the creature. I didn't know what to do next, but I came up with a plan. I was going to distract the creature by throwing something behind my house. When I knew it was there, I was going to run out the front door into the street and grab Paul's gun. When the creature comes back around, I will shoot it in the head, hopefully killing it. If Paul knew what it was, he must have had silver bullets loaded. I grabbed a vase from the hallway and headed toward the bathroom again. I slowly started to open the window. I made sure the coast was clear and dropped the vase onto the ground. I heard the creature scurry away from the front deck. I quickly ran towards the front door. I unlocked it and swung it open. I made a break for Paul. His throat was sliced, and there was a pool of blood around his head. I grabbed the gun and looked toward my house. I shouted at the creature, asking it to show itself. The road fell silent. After about 10 seconds, I saw it galloping out from the side of my house on all fours. I raised a rifle and shot, closing my eyes. My eyes peeled open. The creature was in a fetal position on the ground, back onto me. This thing must have been 10 feet tall. It was huge. I racked the rifle and started to approach. Slowly but surely, I crept my way up towards its body. I was about 6 feet away. I raised the rifle again, this time aiming for the head. I pulled the trigger. The thing jumped up and ran away into the woods, whimpering the whole way. Finally, this thing was over. I pulled out my phone and called 911. I explained what happened, not expecting them to believe me. At this point, a few neighbors down the road were woken up by the gunshot and came to see what happened. The police arrived in about 15 minutes. Soon after that, black vans with tinted windows rolled up. Government. I knew right away why they were there. I was questioned all night. I wasn't allowed to stay in my house for about a month. I didn't want to stay either. The government offered to buy the house after I expressed my urge to leave. I sold it for a little bit less than I bought it for. I bought a one-way ticket to Winnipeg and got out of there. It's been about 2 weeks. I've since moved back with my parents and don't plan on leaving anytime soon. I had to board up the windows in my bedroom because I couldn't bring myself to sleep in there. I can't stay home alone either, or else I'll start panicking. For now, I'm going to stay with my parents until I get over it. I think I'm going to get a place in the city so there are no woods. It's safe to say my dream has changed. I'm done with the woods forever. Fourth story. I don't think my dog is really a dog. I'm currently hiding in my closet, shaking in fear. I'm typing this out on my phone, so I'm sorry if there's a formatting issue or grammar, but I don't really give right now. In case I don't make an update to this post, please report this to the authorities, or anyone please, I don't know what to do. During April of 2018, I adopted a 5-month-old puppy from the pound. I was lucky enough to get her out of that hellhole and into my loving home. She was a border collie mix, and her name was Nellie. I don't know what happened to her, but what I have now is not my dog. She was a timid little pup when I first took her home. I remember she was inside for at least 5 minutes before she peed on the carpet. I could only laugh and kiss her because I was so happy. She slept in my bed that night, and for many more nights to come. She only weighed maybe 6 or 7 kilograms when I first picked her up. The months that followed were amazing. For the first time since I graduated high school, I was over the moon. Every day when I got home from work, she would rush to greet me with her lead dangling from her mouth, her tail wagging wildly. She absolutely loved to grab the newspaper from the mailbox with me. She was also an awesome chick magnet, but that's besides the point. She loved my neighbor, a nice man named Paul whose wife had recently passed away for breast cancer. He was an older gentleman, well into his 50s, but never looked a day over 40. He liked to throw a barbecue for the few neighbors we had in our little rural community. He always made an effort, so we all returned the favor with bringing food and beer. Things began to change in December of 2018. In the early hours of the morning on the 5th, I believe, Nellie woke me up. I grabbed my glasses from the bedside table and flicked on a lamp. She was stood about a meter from the door, pointing right at it. I could hear a low growl emanating from her. Curious, I got out of bed and opened the door. To her surprise, there was nothing there. I thought that would have been the end of it. A few more days pass, and on the 9th, it happened again, early hours of the morning and pointing at the door. This continued for the next week. I believe this is when Nellie disappeared. At about 2 a.m. on the 21st, Nellie woke me up and wanted to go outside. She would do this once every few weeks, so it was nothing out of the ordinary. She would wake me up by licking my face and then sulk and lay down in front of the door if I wouldn't get up. Behind my backyard is a forest that extends for miles. Sometimes Nellie liked to hunt down rabbits and possums when we would go for a walk through the woods. When I let her out that night, she walked to about 5 meters before the tree line. I watched her pee, and she started her way back to the house. This is when things didn't go exactly as planned. She must have heard something because she whipped around and pointed at the trees and growled. I thought it might have been a rabbit, but thinking back on it now, it was probably something much worse. She barked, then made a beeline for the trees. She disappeared into the thickness before I heard more barking. Then nothing. Absolute silence. I was about to grab a torch and put on my red bands, but then the trees started rustling. There was no wind. It was distressing to say the least. Then they stopped. I called out her name and waited. About a minute later, she wandered out of the trees and back inside. I thought nothing of it and promptly went back to sleep. I should have thought about it. As the months continued, things got weird. She stopped wanting to go on walks. She cut back on her food and began to get skinnier. I decided to change up her diet from dog biscuits to meat. She liked that. She really liked that. Sometimes she would run off into the woods to go hunting for rabbits or anything she could get her paws on. I also noticed she began to get bigger. Not fat bigger, because as she got bigger, it looked like she got skinnier. Then she stopped playing with her toys. That weirded me out the most because her beloved squeaky duck toy I got for her the day she came home was always with her inside the house. Now it lay, gathering dust in the corner of my room. But she began to show a liking to the barbecue get-together Paul would throw. A little too much. Honestly, that should have been a warning sign. That day was the 26th of February, 2019. In the following weeks, people unfortunately died. It was small to begin with. That makes it sound better than it was. Old people died first. As sad as it sounded, we all thought it was because of old age. Then we got the details. Horrific details. They were murders, violent and bloody murders. We were absolutely shit scared then. Paul and I started communicating a lot more than we used to. A text every hour or so just to check in, or maybe a phone call or two. He told me I should keep the key for my gun safe in the lock in case of an emergency. I listened. I listened because I trusted him. I listened because he was one of my only friends. This brings us to tonight, the 24th of March. I awoke to the sound of gunfire. I rushed over to my curtains and yanked them open. Paul's house was on fire. I immediately rushed to put on some thick clothes and grab a flashlight and my phone ready to dial 111 for a fire truck. At the time, I didn't even notice my bedroom door was open when I clearly remember closing before I went to bed that night. Nor did I notice Nellie was missing. I yanked open my back door and I froze. It was illuminated by the bright fire of Paul's home. It stood on its hind legs, tall and lanky, completely black with white highlights over its body. The eyes were almost a glowing red. Its claws were massive, and sadly one set was clearly protruding through Paul's chest. I actually don't know. It felt like so long ago, even though it was only an hour ago. I couldn't feel a thing. I couldn't even feel the flashlight slip through my fingers and land heavily on the concrete ground of my back patio. I instantly realized my mistake, and I saw it look at me. It looked me deep in the eye, and I saw her. Her, my sweet girl, my Nellie, or more rather, what was pretending to be Nellie. It dropped Paul to the ground and terrifyingly reared its head into the air and howled deeply. It sounded like a mix between the sound of absolute pain and what I could only describe as Lupin's howl from Prisoner of Azkaban. That was the only motivation I needed to run. I hauled ass into my bedroom and dived into my closet and shut the door. I covered myself in dirty washing and stayed still. It felt like I laid there for a few million years. It walked, or skulked more rather, into my room. I heard its claws clatter across the hardwood floor before stopping. I couldn't see a thing, but I heard it howl once again before it sounded like it tore my bed to bits. I heard glass smash and hard objects collide with the walls. Then nothing. Complete silence once again before I skulk off and leave the house. Probably to finish eating my friend. It's now 7 a.m. I can hear sirens outside, but I'm too afraid to leave lest that thing is waiting for me on the other side of the door. The inky thing I could do for the last few hours was type this out and do research, but it didn't make sense. I Googled everything I remembered about that thing. I got a result that I'm fairly certain is what it is. It didn't make sense. I read pages upon pages of this thing, looked at artwork, folklore. Everything. It doesn't make sense. The research says the location of the creature is found in the United States, usually on Native American land. So what is a goddamn Wendigo doing in rural New Zealand? Fifth story. Never shoot a skinwalker. My two buddies and I went on a hunting trip for bull elk last November, and we were having a great time, to say the least. That, however, soon would change after what we saw on the third day. Now, I'm not one for superstition, and I don't believe in ghosts at all, but what we saw out there really changed my view about those sorts of things. The trip started out normally after we parked our trailers at camp. We got there a day early before the hunt officially started, so we could settle in and get some scouting done. Only Eric and I had licenses because Brian didn't draw out this year, but he wanted to come along with us anyway. Brian also brought along his German shepherd named Lucy, which stayed back at camp with a leash that was connected to a metal spike. The spike was so deep in the ground that I wondered if we would be able to get it out. I asked Brian, and he just told me that his dog was so strong that it had to be that deep. I enjoyed playing with Lucy. She was always excited to see me and would greet me by jumping up on two legs and trying to lick my face. Eric, however, was not amused by her and would constantly yell at her to leave him alone. Anyway, the first 2 days we saw so many cow, elk in valleys and on sides of the mountains that I thought for sure we would see some bulls out there, but there were none among them. It wasn't until the third day of the hunt that we saw a bull elk, but it was too far away to take a shot at. And even if we were able to hit it, it would take hours trying to pack that thing out. So that evening we decided to hunker down next to some fallen trees and were able to watch a hillside. While we were surveying the area, Brian spotted a coyote about 250 yards walking to a small pond of water strangely, as if it was maimed. Eric took out his binoculars to take a closer look, and he started to describe it, saying, "That coyote, it ain't right looking. It has a hunch on its back like a bear, and its jaw, oh man, its damn jaw, seems like it's been broken, and now it's just drooping there like a dead fish." "Let me see those binos," I asked curiously with an outstretched hand. Eric handed them to me, and as he did, he seemed to grasp his gun tightly. I took them and looked at the animal and said, "You're right, That thing's jaw is just hanging there. Also, did you happen to notice its hair? It's so long and unevenly dispersed. I then handed the binoculars to Brian, and he looked at the coyote for 1 second and screamed. Brian, shut up. We're hunting. Eric whispered harshly. What did you see? I asked as I looked at his shocked facial expression. Brian looked at his feet as he muttered, I saw my dog Lucy, but it wasn't her? I don't know what that was. It couldn't have been your dog. When I looked at it, it looked like a dying coyote. It didn't have the large black spot on its back or your dog's strawberry red sides and underbelly. I said in a plain, yet confused manner. Well, since we ain't going to see anything out here cause you screamed like a baby, I'm going to put that coyote out of its misery, Eric said angrily as he raised his rifle and looked through the scope. A large shot followed, and we saw the animal drop down soon after. It was a clean kill, and Eric was curious about seeing what was wrong with the animal up close, so he started getting ready to hike out. As he got his stuff together, he said, You probably just didn't get a good look at it, Brian. Your dog is fine. Brian stood up, and as he brushed the dirt off he replied, I swear I saw my dog, but an evil, demented version of it with human eyes. But you guys are probably right. There's no way she could have had the strength to yank out the metal stake holding her back at camp. Well, let's go find out the truth about this animal, I said somewhat excitedly as I started walking toward the dead animal. It took us about half an hour to hike over to it, and we lost sight of the animal's corpse as we had to pass through some trees. Once we finally got to the spot where the animal had dropped, there was no corpse, just a puddle of blood. However, the blood was blackish and very dense. Eric observed the scene and started to scratch his head as he said, I could have sworn I shot that thing straight through its heart. There's no way it could have just gone back up and walked off. I had an eerie feeling about the whole situation, and Brian was still afraid that it might have been his dog that got shot. Eric, however, noticed a trail of blood leading into a dark tree line. Without asking, he started to follow it, and he loaded his gun. As he did, me and Brian were both freaked out and just watched Eric as he went into the forest. He soon went out of sight, and Brian and I could not leave him here, so we waited. I passed the time by taking a skinny stick and poking at the puddle of blood. It smelled terrible, and the aroma hit me pretty hard, so much so that my stomach convulsed, and I threw up. You okay? Brian asked as he put his hand on my back. Before I could answer, there was a loud shot that echoed through the trees, and we both looked at the direction it came from. Must have found the animal, I said as I spit into the grass. As soon as I said this, we could now see Eric, but he was full-on sprinting. Run! He screamed as he ran at us. I noticed that he must have dropped his gun because he wasn't carrying it. I was about to ask him what happened, but Brian grabbed my arm and yanked me towards where we had parked the truck. Without hesitation, I ran. We soon made it back to the truck, and my shoulder hurt from the rubbing of the gun strap. I looked back at Eric, who slowed down for nothing. I soon looked behind him and saw nothing chasing us. So I opened the truck and got in without worry. Eric then climbed in and told me to hit the gas and go. I was so perplexed on what Eric saw out there, and I knew that he hardly ever got scared of anything, so this started to freak me out. I started driving fast back to camp, and I asked Eric, what did you see out there that was scary enough to make you drop your gun? I don't know, man. That was no damn animal. I followed the trail of blood, and it stopped at the base of a tree, and I was wondering how a coyote was able to climb a tree, but when I looked up, I saw this hairy humanoid creature there. It smelled so freaking bad. Eric went on about how scary that thing was, and how he was done with the hunting trip and wanted to go home. We soon pulled into camp and mutually decided that we were going home. I started to pack my things, and then felt like something was missing. I then thought to myself, Lucy, where's Brian's dog? She usually always is so excited to see us back at camp, she can't stop barking and whining to be set free. As soon as I thought this, Brian started screaming and crying. I ran over to where he was and saw that his dog was gone. However, on further inspection, I noticed what Brian was looking at. Something had pulled out the metal stake in the ground and strung Lucy up on a nearby tree, and it skinned her. Brian just could not stop crying, and Eric ran over to see what was wrong and just stood there, jaw dropped and frozen. He then muttered, She was skinned alive. There's a bunch of bruising caused by struggling around her neck where the collar is. "Shut up, Eric. You ain't helping," I said as I put my shoulder around Brian, who had unstrung his dog's body from the tree. "Skinwalker," Eric said in a low tone of voice as he looked into the distance. He then screamed, "It's a damn skinwalker." I followed his gaze and saw an animal that looked like Lucy, but it had human eyes and a sickly green glazed-looking coat of fur. Brian stopped crying and just stood there, eyes locked on the beast. Eric then whispered with his voice quivering, "We all run to the truck on a count of 3. Just leave everything else." Brian and I slowly nodded and agreed to the plan. "Okay, 3, 2, 1, Eric whispered sharply, and we all took off like a pack of gazelles for the truck. We hopped in, and as soon as we did, we saw the skinwalker lunge at us and struck the right side door with such a powerful blow that nearly tipped over the whole truck. It didn't stop me whatsoever, and I drove out of there faster than I ever could have. After that, none of us ever went hunting again in that area. We never even went back to claim our camping trailers and supplies. It was too terrifying to think that what happened to Brian's dog could happen to us, and that thing would walk around in our skin. Since that experience, I am now a superstitious person. 6th story, the Skinwalker's house. I want to share this story because someone might find it useful, but I share this information urging you to be extremely careful, and I beg you to never use it unless you find that you must. During my freshman year of college, I lost control, mostly due to freedom from my parents and a group of friends who were more interested in a good party than a good grade. I spent more time sleeping and drinking than I did in class or studying. But all of that changed when I woke up in the hospital bruised and covered in cuts. I was told I had been in a car accident the night before. I and 2 others were driving home from a party when the car crossed into the center divider, rolling several times and tossing all of us from the car. Miraculously, I escaped the crash with some scrapes and bruises, but mostly unharmed. The other guy in the car, Michael, broke his arm and got a bad concussion. However, the 3rd occupant, a girl named Sam, was tossed in front of the rolling car and crushed underneath it. It took a rescue crew 4 hours to extricate her from underneath the crumpled mess of metal, and by the time they got to her, she was beyond saving. The police had no idea who was driving during the crash, and I couldn't remember anything about that night due to my state of impairment. Michael and I got stiff warnings about driving while intoxicated or getting into a car with a drunk person, but other than that, we got off scot-free. My friends all said that Sam had been driving and that I was so up I couldn't even walk, let alone drive a car. Despite their reassurances, I was haunted by guilt and uncertainty. Had I been driving when we wrecked? Why did I survive? Was I responsible for her death? Every night, I had nightmares of Sam calling for me from underneath her twisted metallic grave. I stopped leaving my dorm, stopped answering my phone, consumed by guilt and uncertainty. After a month of moping around my dorm, a friend of mine named Mark reached out. We talked for hours about my uncertainty and how I would never get answers. In response, he told me about the legend of the Skinwalker's house, a ramshackle green shack right off of Highway 380. Here a person could meet with the ancient beings and make deals and bargain, including asking questions that otherwise could not be answered. At first, I was incredulous. I thought Mark was with me, try to play a sick prank. But I was desperate to know, so I talked to some friends who had grown up on a nearby reservation. One of them put me in touch with a tribal elder named Richard, and after a few emails and lying about doing a research project, Richard told me about summoning a skinwalker, which the Navajo call Yinaldushii. When we first spoke, Richard was hesitant to talk about the subject. But after repeated calls and a face-to-face meeting, Richard explained the ritual to summon a skinwalker. As we finished our conversation, Richard warned me that when one makes a bargain with a witch, the witch always takes something in return. I will give you the same warning that Richard gave me. Yinaldushii is not to be summoned or questioned on a whim. Please do not summon a skinwalker unless you are ready to accept the consequences of your actions. If you decide to disregard my warning, you will need the pelt of a coyote for animal fat candles, a rosary that has been blessed by a priest, a liter of animal blood, and a crow's feather. Skinwalkers are most active right after sundown when there is a storm coming in from the southeast. The house where you can meet them is between mile marker 13 and 14. It's not hard to find. It took 3 months to find everything and for the perfect weather system to arrive. Mark and I drove together to the house around 5, just as the sun began to sink underneath the Magdalenas. Shadows ooze from the dilapidated house, its putrid green paint peeling off of the bleached bones of wood. The house had no windows or doors remaining, and I could smell the mildew and rot from the road. Mark and I climbed through the barbed wire fence in front of the house and made our way in as storm clouds rolled in, bringing with them peals of angry thunder. As we stepped inside, the smell of old rotting would overwhelm me, and I fought the urge to vomit as we sat down on the stripped wooden floor. We spread out the coyote pelt with the head facing me, placing the greasy wax candles at the ends of its paws. We then placed the crow's feather in the mouth of the coyote pelt. After setting up the pelt and lighting the candles, Mark left the house and parked the car to turn off a mile up the road. When I was sure he was gone, I took the rosary in my hands and pulled hard, scattering the beads across the floor and pelt. I sat down at the head and took the goat's blood I had procured from a butcher and dumped it across the pelt, spattering myself and the ground in dark maroon splatters. The storm continued its steady progression across the desert, and the roar of thunder rumbled in my chest. I closed my eyes and focused on the sound of the storm willing the creature towards me. I was lost deep in my focus when I heard it, a wolf's howl mixed with the screams of a woman, a horrible cacophony of animal and man swirling together. I opened my eyes to see the house wreathed in fog, the supernatural mist surrounding the house, but not permeating the structure itself. I heard a deep guttural chant coming from behind me as the creature approached the dilapidated wooden structure. Then came the footsteps, heavy padding steps crunched against the gravel, behind me quickly followed by the creak of wood as it stepped into the house. Its hot breath stung at the back of my neck as it sniffed me before circling in front of me. It had taken the form of a huge gray wolf, far bigger than even myself. The legs were too long and spindly, the hide patchy and balding, and its ears were short and tattered. The skinwalker sat across the pelt from me and stared at me, staring at me like I was a rabbit about to be devoured. Its eyes were unlike those of a wolf's, with dark brown iris, angry white sclera, and round pupils. Suddenly the wolf let out a pained yelp and began to shudder. The braying whimpers of the animal filled the house as the fur and skin began to slough off the creature. The flesh sizzled and popped like frying meat as the body began to disintegrate, quickly followed by the opening of the chest cavity as a woman crawled out of the quickly decomposing wolf carcass. She had Native American features with skin so wrinkled and scarred I couldn't even guess her age. Hair hung in black stringy strands. And worst of all, her lips were stretched and mangled so that her mouth could never close fully. She wore a patchwork of skins and pelts and a pair of antlers atop her head. Even sitting, she was nearly a head taller than me. She locked eyes with me, in human horizontal slits like a goat's peering out from behind the mess of hair that hung around her face. Her voice croaked in her throat, and a harsh guttural dialect spewed forth from her lips. My heart sank. How could I have been so stupid? Why would an ancient Navajo, which speak English? She must have noticed my disappointment, because she reached for a pouch on her belt and took out some sort of gray, waxy substance. She spread it on the tips of her index fingers, leaned forward, and jammed her fingers into my ears, her long, dirty fingernails scratching my ear canal. I yelled in pain and surprise at the intrusion, and she shifted her weight back into a sitting position. For a split second, my hearing faded before the sound of the storm surged back to life with a loud crack. The old woman locked eyes with me again, her face lit by the flickering candlelight. She spoke again, this time in English. I have given you the gift of hearing. What is it you seek from my who goes on all fours? Her voice low and raspy, like sandpaper on stone. My voice caught in my throat, my gut tightening at her words as I began to drift into a daze. I pushed my fingernails into the flesh of my palm until I could focus again. When I did answer, my voice was weak and uncertain. I need to know if I killed her. She cackled, her voice spiraling to a crescendo until she sounded like a coyote baying at a frightened rabbit. Very well, Billigana. I can help you. But what have you brought for me? My stomach twisted painfully again as fear clawed at the back of my mind. I haven't brought anything to give you. Very well. If you have nothing to give, then I must take. Do you agree to these terms? I paused for a moment considering what Richard had told me, but my guilt overwhelmed my rationale, and I shakily nodded my head in agreement at her terms. The skinwalker smiled at this, revealing rows of miscellaneous teeth in her cavernous, distorted mouth. The teeth were inhuman, with sharp wolf-like canines mixed in with broad flat teeth like a horse, in a horrible conglomeration of stained rows of ivory shards. The laughter came again from her lips, horrible coyote cackling that made my skin crawl. After another round of laughter, she produced a crude stone knife from her belt and with a quick motion ran it across the palm of her hand, spilling dark rivulets of blood onto the pelt before reaching towards me. I extended my hand, and she dug the cruel stone into the soft flesh of my palm. My skin cried out in agony, and blood wept from the exposed flesh underneath. She clasped my bleeding hand with inhuman strength and pressed my wound against her own. Our blood mixed, and I felt it trickle down my arm and pool at the crook of my elbow. The woman began to chant and stared into my eyes as blood continued to flow freely down our arms onto the pelt beneath us. Her voice grew rough and animalistic as she continued her chanting. As suddenly as she had started, she stopped and let go of my now throbbing hand. Oh, Billigana, how foolish you have been. Just like your forefathers, with their drink and their endless cruelty. But her blood is on her own hands. Her foolish pride gave way to steel and glass. I have given you your answer, and now I will take two things from you. I take from you now, Idzeal, your dreams. A wave of relief washed over me. I could live without dreams anymore. My dreams had been plagued with visions of Sam calling out for help from beneath her metallic tomb, begging for my help. With inhuman strength and speed, the skinwalker grabbed my hand again and brought it to its mouth. I pulled hard against its grip and yelled to no avail as it pushed my thumb into its mouth. Hard teeth clamped down hard against the appendage, tearing away the flesh and bone of my thumb. Blood sprayed from the wound, painting a sanguine picture on its face. The creature chewed, and I could hear the crack of bone and the squelch of soft flesh in its teeth. I screamed in agony, clutching my hand and pressing the wound to my chest. My vision faded and blurred as I slumped to the floor. I wish I had gone unconscious. I wish I had closed my eyes. Instead, I watched as the skinwalker tore at the flesh of its face, its long, claw-like fingernails shredding through skin and muscle. The skinwalker grabbed the skin on its arm and pulled, tearing it away from the muscle underneath, the flesh coming away like wet newspaper. I watched the muscles of its arm bulge and flex as it tore away the soft skin of its stomach, disemboweling itself. A gray coil of intestines lolled out of the abomination's abdomen, dragging against the rough wooden floor. It continued tearing away its flesh until only scraps remained on a skeletal frame. I willed my eyes to close, but they would not. I stared transfixed on the horrifying visage in front of me. The figure dropped to all fours and pulled one of the pelts it was wearing over its face. The pelt stretched and contorted, spreading over the skeletal limbs. The figure trembled and shook, twitching unnaturally. Then it began to grow, the limbs stretching and contorting, the chest becoming narrower. I watched as two sets of large antlers splintered out of the top of its head, stopping just before the ceiling. The figure continued to shift and contort until finally a massive bull elk stood in front of me. It strode out of the house, then paused and looked down at me. We locked eyes for just a moment before it let out a loud bugle and took off into the night. I pulled off my shirt and wrapped it tightly around my still bleeding hand. I staggered out of the house and glanced around, afraid the creature was waiting for me outside. There was nothing except for the rumble of thunder and the throbbing in my hand. I walked a mile to where Mark had parked the car, all the time pleading with my body to not bleed out. Mark paled when he saw me and rushed me to the hospital. I told the staff at the hospital that I had been messing with old farm equipment, a story they bought easily enough. In spite of everything that happened, I felt relieved with the knowledge that I hadn't killed Sam. The Skinwalker kept its word. It did take my dreams, because now I dream not about Sam, but instead about the Skinwalker. I dream of the Skinwalker changing and shifting. I watch time and time again as it tears apart animals for its dinner. The worst is when it attacks people, as I'm forced to watch as it stalks hikers and campers. I watch as it disembowels them, mounts their bodies on a tree limbs, or skins them alive. I don't go into the woods anymore, for fear that I may see that thing again. But now and then, as I drift off to sleep, I hear the sound of an elk bugle, followed by peals of coyote cackling. 7th story. A Skinwalker is knocking on my door. I'm writing this now as a call for help. I am desperate and I don't know what to do. My name is Michael. I own a dairy farm in the Great Plains, near a Navajo reservation, along with my brother. The farm was built by our parents before we were born, and it was passed down to us after their death. It's a pretty big farm. It has 2 barns, a well, and a house, where we spend most of our free time. Although I've always dreaded this place, because it's the place where our parents died, or at least where they were found at why parents died when we were both 19. Their bodies were found mutilated in the well. There was nothing stolen or destroyed. If not for the blood trail leading to the well, we would have never found them. The case was passed as a murder, but they never had any suspects, and me and my brother were too ravaged by the event to think about it. Years passed, and we forgot about the event, well, until 2 weeks ago. We were gathering food for the cows using an old tractor. It was pretty dark, but we didn't use its headlights because the battery was too old and couldn't stand them being on for very long. As I was loading up the food, I heard my mom's voice calling for me from behind some bushes. "Michael, it's been too long, come to me." But it sounded weird, as if it was spoken through an old radio. I was terrified. I looked at my brother, and he was as white as snow. I whispered to him to turn on the headlights in the direction of the voice. What lay before our eyes made my knees weak. It was a coyote, but its eyes were pitch black, and it was standing on its back legs. I jumped in the tractor, and we noped our way out of there as fast as we could. We arrived at the house and locked the door. That's the moment when I passed out. I woke up in the middle of the night. I thought all that just happened was a dream, but then I saw my brother telling me to stay quiet and pointing his shotgun at the door. Then I heard again, "Michael, come here, my dear." Then started to knock softly on the door. That didn't last for very long, though. The knocking turned into banging. Then my brother started looking through the window at that thing. It realized we were looking at it, and it let out the most horrific screech I've ever heard before it ran off. An hour later, it started again, the voice and the knocking. I've searched it up on the internet, and I learned they're called skinwalkers, evil Navajo men that sold their soul. Calling their names supposedly attracts them. I hope writing it doesn't trigger them. My brother wants to go outside and face it. I'm afraid we won't see the light of day again. Please help us. 8th story. What it's really like to be a matured skinwalker. I tried to jot down all the explanation that came to my mind last night, and rereading it made me realize it was oddly difficult for others to understand. So perhaps this time I would start the story way back when I was first born and work my story up to now as a not-so-human human. I'm a skinwalker, or I figure that's what I'm called. Yep, that scary folklore kind of skinwalker. First, let's clarify. No, we're not dogs with no tail or guys who walk on fours. We are not witches. We are not once human either. What you have read and watched online are lies, adaptations, and exaggerated versions of skinwalkers during our early state of development. Think of a toddler learning to walk and talk. Being a dog, a fish, a deer, a bird, half a bird, or even the first few humans was our toddler phase. We were learning to mimic. I was born a spherical fleshy core the size of a pea, with an eye, a tail, and a mouth. A round red lump of tadpole red meat creature capable of seeing, eating, and doing some extraordinary things to survive. It's hard to have one word that describes what skinwalkers do as infants. In fact, I don't think we even have a word for that, so I'll try to break it down so everyone can understand the step-by-step process of us growing up. As a baby, I was durable and animalistic. I had a strong tail that allowed me to spring and jump like crickets, but it was instinct not to jump, as it requires energy to do so, and as a newborn, you don't have the luxury of carbs. We were vicious, opportunistic hunters, and we had our foul odor to attract the first prey. Unlike other tadpoles who started underwater and preyed on fish, I started alone on land, probably because of my parents' choice of birthing location. My first prey was a bear cub during warmer season, which I was very proud of. It sounds way cooler to hunt a bear than a fish. I jumped into its nostril as it was sniffing me. Then I wiggled my way up to the brain area. Their instinct told me to do 3 things: eat, copy, replace. I feasted on a small portion of the brain and quickly fell asleep. When I woke up, my first thin layer of protection had already coated my red, skinless self, as if the resting time was my body breaking down the structure and chemicals of what I just consumed. It automatically made an exact copy of said portion. There I had my first apartment, inside a bear cub whose brain I gradually ate and replicated until one day I was completely able to control its limbs, although imitating the movements of other bears was awkward and proven to be an ugly task. The outer layer of myself at that point was the exact size of the bear's real, no longer exists, brain, while my real self, the red tadpole that I was, with an eye and a mouth, was resting peacefully inside, like a snail. Except the fact that I have 2 shells when you think of it, the bear body itself and the layer I made that looked and functioned like a bear brain. The bear's head at that point was hollow without me. Soon I learned to behave and hunt salmons like other bears. Soon I learned to shrink and expand my brain shell. Then I learned how to temporarily travel outside of that shell. I would shrink my real body, open a small hole of this brain, and venture south to feast on the spinal bone marrow. It took me days to finally eat all of them and come back up top. Although I was very young, my dexterity allowed me to glue the brain shell to the fake spinal cord that I just made. Soon I realized I no longer had to venture out and use my real mouth to eat. I can consume the bones, muscles, and veins of the bear as long as it touches my outer layer, the fake brain and the fake spinal cord. However, the indirect eating process is significantly slower than eating with my mouth, as the enzymes my shell produced were not as concentrated. I gradually ate and faked the bear inside out. Then I learned to soften and harden my bear shell so I could shrink even more, to the point it felt like it was but a thin layer of meat wrapping around my tadpole core. I ate and cloned all the bones and muscles of the bear, but left the fat and the skin, as it was nasty to consume. Had I shrunk my shell and left the bear there, it would have been nothing but its skin on the ground. Imagine a skinless, fatless adult brown bear walking around, or half of that imagery walking around. The tales of skinwalkers being dogs with no lower half, deer with no tail, humans who walk on 4s probably stemmed from there. People saw our very first attempts to mimic living creatures, and we weren't so masterful at disguising. Again, we were toddlers. I didn't leave the bear and venture out as a skinless monstrosity, though. I lived in my comfortable home for a long while, until one day I smacked a domestic dog unconscious at night. I shrank all of myself as much as possible and left the deflated bear via its mouth. I grew from the size of a pea to a kidney bean before I left. I then wiggled my way to the dog's brain through its mouth. There I ate the brain within hours of the night. However, in the middle of my feasting poured in a new experience. I'd call it not food-related good memories. At first it was foreign and shocking to me, for I ate the bear's brain since it was a young cub. My entire memory as the bear was simply the joy of me eating salmons and berries. But when I was in this dog, it was something else. Joy and happiness that weren't associated with food, but with a foreign creature that was significantly taller than me. And in the dog's memories, the creature always showed its teeth as if it was trying to eat the dog. I learned that showing teeth means aggression behavior back when I was a bear because that was what older bears did. They try to scare each other with their teeth. I thought this creature, the human, was trying to eat me, the dog, but at the same time, the dog itself associated that aggression with joy. As a baby skinwalker, I didn't know shifting from one species to another would be such a challenge. And that was 11 years ago. I'm a male human host now, and I don't need to eat anymore, if not at all. I only eat to maintain the host's body. I don't take over people for the sake of comfort eating either. I only eat when I need a new identity. I don't eat their brain completely like I used to do, because doing so will kill the host immediately once I leave them. I learned that the hard way. I often have sex with the next potential host, and while they're sleeping together, I leave the worn-out home for a new journey. And yes, skinwalkers can sense each other. We can also kill if we want to, but challenging mankind is not our interest. We just want to survive and thrive as a species. It's no use trying to irritate the host. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.